डेढ़ सौ ढाई सौ
नहीं मिला दो दिन में रेट चेंज हो गए। पेट्रोल जैसे बढ़ाया हर चीज ने रेट बढ़ा दिए। चाय की ये पतीला उठा के
5,000 रुपए की चाय से चाहिए खुद नहीं है आपको
जिससे फायदा भी हो कुछ चाय पी के खून जो स्वाद
पतीला क्या है
उठा के वहां रखा है
अभी मुझे उठा के रख दो तो
काश में उठा सकती
उठा के रख दो। अभी मैं सोच ही रहा हूँ कि मैं पानी कैसे भरूं।
आप उठा के सिलेक्ट करें दो हाथ पे हाँ तो सारा रॉन्ग
पतीला बोल रहा है
हाँ
पपीता था
पतीला कहाँ से आया
पतीला सुनाइए
पतीला आया कहाँ से देख मोबाइल का देखो बोला तो बोलेगी पतीला तो पतीला है वो उन्होंने उठा लिया
और क्या आपने पतीला बोला
Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Interesting things happening that we're going to be covering tonight. We're going to be going over some data that was used to push the first COVID vaccine booster dose. Turns out the data was heavily flawed. Is anybody surprised? Also, Israel, a country we support with billions of dollars under the guise that it's the only democracy in the Middle East, has voted on an incredibly unpopular and undemocratic judicial reform that consolidates power to Netanyahu, causing many to question her unwavering support. So we're going to be going over that and we understand it because we do shove billions of dollars over there and we should know about where our money is going and what it's supporting. But first, Elon Musk has rebranded Twitter to X. And the reason why this is important, I know many of you are not on Twitter, you don't care about Twitter, it just doesn't seem like it's anything at all, but except a place where people squabble and fight with each other and sling a lot of mud, and I do find Twitter to I don't know what to call it. We do shove billions of dollars over there. We should be able to where our money is going. All my exes know what to support. I don't know. But first, but Elon Musk has rebranded Twitter to X. It matters. Twitter's often just a social media. And the reason why this is important, I know many of you are not on Twitter, you don't care about Twitter, it just doesn't seem like it's anything at all, but for the app that is now called X, fight with each other and sling a lot of mud, and I do find many to all my exes, I don't know, but Elon Musk Twitter's often just a social media. I'm going to respect Twitter's new pronouns. They can just forget about it. I'm going to be calling it whatever the hell I want to call it. Well, the reason why this matters for the many of you who are not on Twitter and don't give a damn is because Twitter, this or X app, is essentially going to be, well, everything. I mean, he's really kind of said the plan that he has for this is to make it everything and almost integrate it into our lives in a way that honestly reminds me of Apple. It sounds to me like he's taking on Apple, taking on the iPhone, taking on that everything that Apple has done for our lives. He kind of wants this new X company to do that. What he says is that X is, of course, going to be a social media site, but he wants to make it much, much more than that. So what he wants to develop it into is not only just tweeting our thoughts and messaging, we do direct message one another on that app, but he wants to turn the messaging into fully encrypted. He wants it to be able to where we can message in every type of way. So when Facebook came out with Messenger, and you can make phone calls, you can video chat with people on Messenger, you can direct message people on Messenger. Sounds like he wants to do that with X. So X would become an app where you can communicate with loved ones or friends or family or people that you meet on X, on the app. And he wants that to be fully encrypted. He also says that he wants it to be, he's rolling out the live streaming, which is really great for many creators. Many of us have thought, what's the point of Twitter? You can't, like, you're on there, you're wasting your time, you're just fighting with people, you're putting your opinions out there. It doesn't really, it's not like you can monetize it, you're just wasting your time. But it turns out now, he's monetized Twitter. He's even lowered the threshold of what it requires for you to be monetized. For a while there, it was 5 million impressions. You had to be really active, have a really big following. But now they've lowered that quite a bit. And so now I think anyone who just gets verified as a creator can actually start creating on Twitter. So he wants to turn it into a site that's, I would say, would rival potentially YouTube in a way, right? Another competitor for that. For those of us that are on Rumble, and Rumble's a really great interface and really truly a free speech platform, I'm not sure how Twitter is going to integrate into that scene. I mean, there are quite a few other platforms that are doing something similar. You've got, of course, Rockfin, Odyssey. There's a bunch of platforms that are out there where people can post their content. BitChute, is that one? That's one, right? So Twitter is another one, but Twitter is so heavily political, and if Twitter doesn't censor, that could be good, because a lot of platforms, they have like a wide range of types of content, and Twitter is so heavily political. But I'm sure there's so many people use Twitter. There's all kinds of different, or X, I don't know, what are we calling it? Twitter. I'm dead naming it. I'm just going to keep dead naming it. I don't care. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, actually. So they're going to be allowing creators to monetize on Twitter. Now, that still is not the reason why this is important to you, because many of you are still not going to care about that. Yeah, sure, maybe it's a place where you can watch more videos, you can message people, make phone calls. That sounds all neat and stuff. But let me show you why people are actually kind of freaking out about X, because Elon has said that he wants to turn this into a bank, essentially, almost like a bank. But the way he's describing it is, it's not, you have to rethink how banks work, but essentially he wants this to become half of the global financial system, half of that. So let's hear what he has to say. This is a SOT we call it a SOT here in the behind the scenes land. I don't even know what that even stands for, SOT, sound. I have to ask, but we got this video clip. And this video clip is what was trending all on Twitter, and people freaking out saying Elon Musk is going the ways of CBDCs. He's going to roll out central bank digital currency. He's the guy who, claims that he's all for free speech. He claims that he's one of us, and in reality, he's just just sheep herding us into the establishment, the World Economic Forum. He hired that Linda Yaccarino lady, and she's the one that came from the WEF, if you remember. He hired her back in May, and everybody was very shocked by this, because here she was, a proud person coming out of the World Economic Forum. So people see that. They see that Elon Musk is now talking about X.
Essentially, if done right, the X would serve people's financial needs to such a degree that over time it would become, I don't know, maybe half of the global financial system.
Wow.
Or some big number.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the number is, but pretty big. So it would be by far the biggest sort of financial institution. But like I said, not really in the way that people are used to thinking about banks.
Mm-hmm.
Just the most efficient database for the thing that is money. Like I said, least amount of fraud. Everything's real time.
Over.
essentially, if done right, the X would be would serve people's financial needs to such a degree that over time it would become, I don't know, maybe half of the global financial system.
Wow.
Or some big number.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the number is, but pretty big. So it would be by far the biggest sort of financial institution. But like I said, not really in the way that people are used to thinking about banks.
Mhm.
Just the most efficient database for the thing that is money. Like I said, like least amount of fraud. Everything's real time. And if it involves money in any way, it can be dealt with seamlessly on one location.
Okay, so that's got a lot of eyebrows raised. People thinking, oh my gosh, this sounds like CBDC. You know, he's going to create some sort of digital monetary platform that everyone can use. And so what does that mean? When you create something digital, does that mean you're going to be able to track it? I mean, look, right now, the way it works on Twitter or X is that you can search anyone's tweets. So you can actually, you know, it's a data footprint. You can actually go back in time and search through people's tweets and see what they say, and you can hold them accountable and say, you said this 10 years ago. How dare you, you hypocrite? I don't care if you're 15 years old, you said it. And now you've grown up, but, you know, look at you. So we know that this stuff is tracked already. The things that you put out there on Twitter are tracked. So a big concern is then, will this monetary system that he intends to unveil with X, is that also going to be tracked? Is this a digital currency that is the very thing that we're all very afraid of when it comes to the WEF and like ESG scores? Now, Elon Musk has been, even though he did hire Linda Yaccarino, he has been an incredibly loud, vocal critic against the World Economic Forum. That's why it was so surprising he hired her, because he's tweeted numerous times against the World Economic Forum, saying that I was invited, I didn't go. This is a global government that they're just pushing on people. They shouldn't be doing this. He has been incredibly critical of the World Economic Forum. He's also incredibly critical of ESG scores. So those are the environment, social governance scores that they give out to companies to see whether or not they're good when it comes to, you know, it's supposed to be the environment, but then they turn it into social. So Tesla has like a low score compared to all of these really pollution emitting companies. And it's because they just don't like Elon Musk himself. But he's a very vocal critic of all of that global world governance stuff. So it's a little out of character then for him to unveil this, I'm going to make this payment system that is going to be half of the global financial system, and it's not going to be a bank in the way that you know it. It's going to be this, and he doesn't even call money currency. He's calling it data. You know, so he's talking about it almost like a cryptocurrency in a way, and he wants to turn it in, and he wants X to be the largest one in the world. So this, this is concerning. So let's actually watch this isn't the entire clip. This is actually from an interview with Zuby on Twitter. Those of you who are on Twitter, he's one of the, big, one of the big accounts on Twitter. And he sat down with Elon Musk and did about an hour or so long interview. And these are just clips from that interview. But this one just gives a little bit more context to what he was saying in that 45-second clip. This one is now 3 minutes, so it gives you a little bit more of what he was saying beforehand and after that. So let's go ahead and watch.
So you brought up X. X is something that you've been having in mind for a long time. Tell me
like
the
20
story.
years.
Yeah, tell me the story
years.
about X.com.
Well, I mean, way back in the day, the idea was for X or X.com to be an all-encompassing financial services company, or thought kind of in like a infinite information theory way to be the most efficient database for the information that is money. The way that money currently works is, from a practical standpoint, it's still mostly run on mainframes. That's still a thing for banks. It's mostly written in COBOL. It's still mostly batch processing. So actually, the financial system is very slow. It's not secure. You've got all these heterogeneous, complex databases. So if you have a real-time homogeneous database that is just like fundamentally more efficient and doesn't have all the expenses of bank buildings all over the place and bank branches and ATMs, which are increasingly kind of redundant. It can operate way more efficiently. And so essentially, if done right, the X would be would serve people's financial needs to such a degree that over time it would become, I don't know, maybe half of the global financial system.
Wow.
Or some big number.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the number is, but pretty big. So it would be by far the biggest sort of financial institution. But like I said, not really in the way that people are used to thinking about banks.
Mm-hmm.
Just the most efficient database for the thing that is money. Like I said, like least amount of fraud. Everything's real time. And if it involves money in any way, it can be dealt with seamlessly on one location. And then in addition, you've got the sort of social media element, which is also information. It's people sharing information of various kinds, whether it's text, video, pictures, voice, and so so both money and what we call social media are really information exchange. And I think there's potential there to make a product that is really quite compelling, that combines all these things, simplifies people's lives, is more, cost efficient for the average person.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't have a minimum number of fees and whatnot. So, I think there's just a lot of potential to create some, like the kind of the ultimate app or system, website, whatever.
So that's interesting. So it sounds a lot to me like, for one, he'd been developing this for 20 something years. So this is not something that he's just coming out with and saying, oh, I want to get in the CBDC game and the government is ushering me in to help do this. Elon Musk has his background with PayPal, so he's always been into the financial transaction game. And he also was one of the first companies to allow his product to be sold with Bitcoin. Remember, he was taking Bitcoin when it came to Tesla sales for a while there, and then he kind of stopped and said, wait a minute, I don't know. And so now he's saying that he wants X to turn into this big financial, some sort of payment sort of system. It does remind me a bit of Apple. So it's like you've got your iPhone, you have Apple Pay, you can click on the side of your phone and pay with whatever. It's also obviously you're able to connect with people. It's a bit social. You've got a bunch of different apps on there. So I'm curious if this X company that he's creating, he's taking Twitter and he's using that as the base. And he's saying, I'm just going to, rather than build it from scratch, and he even said in this interview, I could have built it from scratch, and that was kind of my plan, but then I didn't need to because I bought Twitter, and now I can actually take Twitter and just use that as the springboard to create all of these other layers of things. And so it's very possible, when you think about the iPhone, for example, how did it start? It started as the iPod. And then from the iPod, it developed into, and it was just iTunes. Like, you're just going to listen to your music on this machine. And then that suddenly turned into phone. And now it's what it is. And now you have an Apple credit card and it does everything that you want it. There's just a million things that you need your iPhone for, or whatever smartphone that you're using. And so it sounds to me like he's wanting to usher in something along those lines. And so we can't really quite imagine fully what he's imagining, but it sounds like he is getting into this social media game. He's wanting to take on Facebook. It's something that, Mark Zuckerberg never really was able to develop Facebook into. There was a time, if you remember, there was chatter about a Facebook phone, and when everybody was on Facebook and Facebook was like the hot thing. But Facebook is kind of going the way of MySpace in a lot of ways, and Mark Zuckerberg is doing whatever he can to try to reinvent it a bit with this Threads app. He has Instagram, and then he unleashed Threads, and of course that is not going well at all. And so it'll be interesting to see what Elon actually is envisioning with this whole X company. Again, though, I still don't know what to call tweets. If he's going to change the name of those, I think it should just stay, I suppose. On this note, though, of CBDCs, I wanted to show this job listing to you because this is frightening. It turns out the Federal Reserve is marching forward with these CBDCs. And in fact, they're hiring. They're looking for people to develop these CBDCs. Take a look at this job posting here. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. They're looking for a senior crypto architect for central bank digital currency. This is a full-time job. This job posting has been expired. I think they, once this kind of started trending, I think they started to get a lot of inquiries and they shut down the job posting at this point. But it was a full-time job for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. It says, as part of the Federal Reserve's mission to promote accessible, safe, and efficient systems to facilitate dollar transactions, the Federal Reserve System seeks a technologist to perform central bank digital currency research and development. Given the dollar's significant role, the FRS, which is the Federal Reserve System, seeks to further understand the cost and benefits of the potential technologies for CBDC and this emerging field. So this position is an outstanding opportunity to be part of a team on the leading edge of technology research into central bank digital currency. You will join a world-class team in a dynamic environment that has the feel of a startup. So the Federal Reserve is going to have the feel of a startup as they're developing these central bank digital currencies that they're going to throw at all of us. It says we're looking for a lead application developer to implement example systems related to CBDC. You will engage directly with management, other developers on the team, development operations team, and vendors to ensure the Federal Reserve is well positioned to design, develop, and implement technology to support a CBDC as may be required by the Board of Governors. So the Board of Governors are those that are in control of the Federal Reserve, sort of. Really, who's in control of the Federal Reserve when you really get down to the nuts and bolts of it is the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is the main bank, and it's the investors into that bank that are really, truly running the world, and that would be Chase Bank and Citibank. So like Jamie Dimon is one of the main players. So really they kind of default to and then whoever's in control of Jamie Dimon and who's ever in control of Citibank, which is really pretty much the same players in the banking system. So they're saying that this is going to be required by the Board of Governors. So the Federal Reserve wants to do this, and this new job position would help research the development and the implementation of CBDCs and also develop the actual CBDCs. So they're looking for somebody with a bachelor's degree with a concentration in computer science. They say that the salary range, $134,000 to maximum is $215,000, depending on your, I guess, experience in doing this. So it's happening. This was a posting on Indeed. You know, they're just out there looking. They're out there looking and hiring. So it's happening. So we'll see what Elon Musk's X and financial taking over half the global financial system with that. I don't know if that would be in competition with CBDCs in a way, if that would be like, here's a place where you could put your money and no one, if Elon is actually one of the good guys, right? The one that is still really fighting against the World Economic Forum, is truly fighting against ESG scores, is truly fighting for free speech. He even said in that interview with Zuby that right now Twitter is losing, like it cost $2 billion for free speech, that's how many advertisers backed out because they didn't like what he was doing. And so that's how much Twitter lost. He says the cost of free speech is $2 billion. That's how much it's been at this point. Maybe they'll make it back, but that's the price. So if it turns out that he's actually one of the good guys and he's going to develop this new currency system in order to compete with this idea of digital currency that they're going to be monitoring, then you can expect and you can bet that things are going to get worse for Elon Musk than they already are. As it is, because he bought Twitter and turned it into a free speech platform, which he says he knows it's not perfect. There are still some issues with it. People are still being censored, but he says they are working to make that very transparent so that if you are shadow banned or censored or something's wrong with your account, you'll know why and you'll know what you can do to correct that. But right now, he is under attack. Here is Elizabeth Warren actually was trying to she's been trying to get the SEC to investigate Elon Musk. She's very upset about Elon Musk being, this is a letter that she sent out to, she's wanting the SEC to investigate Elon Musk, saying that basically the idea is that she's alleging that Tesla shareholders are not getting the best of Elon because he's too busy focusing on Twitter or X or whatever that is. And so she's alleging that he potentially misappropriated funds and employees in using them for the acquisition of Twitter when they were really supposed to be focusing on Tesla, and that is a disservice to the shareholders of Tesla, and therefore he needs to be investigated for some wrongdoing. So they're going after Elon Musk. Here's Elizabeth Warren going after Elon Musk. They're essentially, Democrats are saying, we don't like this whole free speech thing that you're doing. We want to put a stop to it. Now, if Elon Musk is actually going to roll out a global financial system that is going to compete with CBDCs, you can imagine this is absolutely going to intensify. He is going to be under the microscope. They're going to go after him. They're going to try to shut him down. They're going to try to shut his businesses down. They're going to try to shut X down. They're maybe going to even try to shut Tesla down. I mean, it's very bizarre why they're so against him and why they want to keep going after him. But, this is just one of those examples that they're trying to use every possible weapon they can to silence him and get rid of him. He's being treated. He's going to get the Trump treatment. He's going to be even more dangerous than Trump, actually, if he's able to pull all of this off, his vision off. He's going to be the most dangerous man potentially in the world to them. And you can bet that they're going to do everything they possibly can to take him down. That's if he's one of the good guys. That is yet to be seen as we go forward. But if history has any indication, if the things that he said has any indication and the things that he's done, I would imagine that he may actually be a person who is willing to take this on as a person who's going to fight for freedom, free speech, within reason. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be hiccups, but it's better than the alternative, which is that Federal Reserve digital currency that they're definitely pushing on us. Well, let me tell you about our great sponsor, CBDistillery.com. They are doing this incredible offer for you Rumble viewers. They are doing this great offer. You could get up to 50% off everything when you use the code RUMBLE at checkout. So pick all of your stuff out. You could choose from a range of carefully formulated CBD and other plant-based solutions for relaxation, stress, sleep, pain after physical activity, even mood and focus. They extract healing plant compounds and vital nutrients for your whole body. No artificial colors, no artificial flavors or preservatives, no sweeteners, just 100% clean ingredients. So don't miss this Rumble exclusive sale. Get up to 50% off your order by visiting cbdistillery.com and entering Rumble at checkout. That is cbdistillery.com. That link is down below. Enter Rumble at checkout. Unfortunately, I'm sorry for those of you watching in my home great state of Idaho, but it is not available in Idaho, Iowa, and South Dakota. Somebody could tell those Idahoans to get it together and stop blocking these types of products. And, it's like one of the states. It's going to be the last holdout state to legalize or even do medical marijuana. There's not even medical in Idaho at this point. So it's like, I don't know. Maybe with all the Californians flooding in, they're all moving to Idaho. So maybe there's going to be a shift in the politics there, but I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you. Okay. Now, in Israel, they voted on some significant judicial reforms that are taking power away from the courts. This has a lot of people up in arms. There's massive protests that are going all across Israel at the moment. People have been extremely upset about that. Actually, they've been protesting this for several months. But today, they actually voted on this, the Knesset, which is the name for the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. The Knesset voted, and they actually passed a judicial reform that is widely unpopular with the people. So it was really popular with the right-wing politicians. It was unpopular with the moderate and left-wing politicians, and very unpopular with the people, yet it passed anyway. And so we're going to break this down. And the reason why this matters is because we give a ton of money every year to Israel. And we do it under the guise that they're a democracy in the Middle East. They're the only democracy in the Middle East, and we've got to protect that democracy. So when things like this happen, when there's an erosion of democracy, it makes you wonder, what are we doing if it's just going to turn into something that doesn't look like democracy? I mean, that's why we're at war Well, the proxy war, why we're fighting Russia in Ukraine in a proxy war is because we say, well, we've got to keep that democracy going in Ukraine. So same thing. Why do we want to go to war with China? Because we've got to protect Taiwan's democracy. Why do we want to go to war? Because we're protecting democracy. So when we are supporting and giving all this money to a nation and they then erode democracy on their own, it makes you wonder and raise some eyebrows. So that's why this is important, why we're going to talk about this and why you need to understand what is happening over there. So they voted on this significant judicial reform. There were 3 judicial reforms that were being proposed. One of them passed today. The other 2 are put on ice. And the reason the other 2 are put on ice is because of all of those massive protests that you're seeing. Too many people are upset. And so Netanyahu decided to just put this one on ice, these other 2, and wait. And he says, we're going to revisit those in the fall. Right now, the Knesset goes on vacation. They have their summer break for a couple of months. They reconvene in September. And when they do, that is when they're going to maybe be talking about these other 2 judicial reforms. But it's likely that those are going to cause massive protests again. And so, not sure how quick they're going to want to be pushing those forward. What they did today was they voted on, let me just get this out. First of all, what you have to kind of understand is a little bit of background with what has been going on in Israel in the government. They've had this political crisis that's been going on since 2018, where, if you remember, they have not been able to vote on a government and on a prime minister. They've been at odds and had election after election. In fact, they had one election, then another election, then a third election, then a fourth election, then a fifth election. They kept having to go for elections because they are a parliamentary system. They needed to get a majority together, a coalition government together in order to form a government. And no one could agree. Essentially, the issue was Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu is an unpopular figure for many people in Israel. He's loved by many and he's hated by many. And essentially, a lot of the people, even people on the right, political parties on the right, said anybody but Netanyahu, anyone but Netanyahu. We'll take anybody. And they were even pointing to people who were even further right-wing than Netanyahu. Some were pointing, of course, to people further left. Some were more moderate. But they really just wanted anyone but Benjamin Netanyahu. And so this was causing a political crisis where the government couldn't be formed. They would form a government for a minute, and it would be by a 1-vote margin. And then that one person would defect and say, that's it. I'm no longer going to be coalesced with this government. And it would collapse the government. And so then they would have to go back to square one and vote again. And this was going on from 2018 until 2022, until ultimately Netanyahu got back in power. During that time that Netanyahu was out of power, and even when he was in power before the political crisis took hold, and one of the reasons for the political crisis is because Netanyahu he's under investigation for crimes, for corruption. So he's being accused of corruption by a lot of people in Israel. He's unpopular. People believe that he's making a lot of money that he shouldn't be making, and they have him under investigation. He is still currently under investigation, even though he is serving as prime minister. So you have to understand that, because that matters with this political crisis. Essentially, what they've decided to do, the Knesset, is to take power away from the court. And one of the ways that they decided to take that power away was let me just I have to get my notes exactly so that I could tell you exactly what it was, the word, because it's really interesting. It's called reasonableness. So the court gets to judge on what's called reasonableness. And so it's really subjective. So there's 2 sides to this. You've got, of course, people that are supporting these judicial reforms and those who are totally against these judicial reforms, which is the majority of people. The majority of people do not want the court's power taken away. As it stands, the court can look at the laws that the Knesset passes, and they could say, this is part of yes, you can have this law. They don't have a constitution in Israel, so it's not like they look at the constitutionality of the laws, but they're looking at the reasonableness of the law. They say, is this law reasonable? Are you pushing something unreasonable on the people of Israel, and they don't want this, and so therefore we're going to rule against it? It's a checks and balances. And so what this government did was they took the ability for the court to rule on reasonableness of the government away from them. So now when the government makes a law, the court just sits their hands tied. The people of Israel could say, this is an unreasonable law. Why are you making us do this? And normally the court would step in and weigh it out and say, yeah, it's pretty unreasonable. And so therefore you cannot go forward with this. Other times they'd say, sounds reasonable. I guess go ahead, right? There was a person that that Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to appoint to his cabinet. The people of Israel said, this is unreasonable. This person is a criminal. This person has been actually convicted of tax fraud, and we don't want them in the government. And so in the cabinet for an unelected cabinet position. That went in front of the courts examined it and said, yeah, this is unreasonable. You cannot pick this person. So what Netanyahu and his friends in the Knesset wanted to do, in the government wanted to do, is they wanted to get rid of the court's ability to judge based on reasonableness. And again, they don't have a constitution, so that's what they judge by. And they effectively voted today to take that away. So now there is no checks and balances on the Israeli government. They just have to sit there and hands tied. And because what's interesting is that now that this law is passed, that they wrote this in, it actually has to go to the courts, and the court has to decide whether or not it's reasonable for the Israeli government to decide that the court cannot decide based on what's reasonable. So it's kind of an interesting quirk that has to happen. Now you might say, well, of course the court is not going to take its own power away. Unfortunately, because this was actually written into what's called basic law in Israel, which is kind of equivalent to our Constitution in a way. It's like, these are the basic laws. These are the fundamental laws. Because this was an amendment to a basic law, the court has never, ever challenged a basic law. So it is unlikely, well, it's kind of an interesting dilemma they're in, but if precedent were to hold, it's unlikely that they would actually challenge a basic law when they've never challenged a basic law before. And the only reason why they would challenge this basic law is because this basic law takes their power away. It's almost a conflict of interest on that, right? But so they're in a very strange situation. But this is why the people of Israel are up in arms, because they now have no protection from their government. And a lot of them feel like the government right now is very right-wing, and they pass, for example, the government will do things like pass a law allowing for illegal settlements to be built in the West Bank where Palestinians are, and the courts would intervene and say, nope, that's unreasonable. You cannot do that, and so therefore we're not going to allow you to pass this law. That is no longer there. That protection is no longer there. So anything this government wants to ram through, they essentially can with no checks and balances on this. So imagine if that were the case here in the United States. That would be pretty, it would be really antithetical to democracy. And that's why the people of Israel are up in arms. Now, in fairness, the people who are for this judicial reform, there are some citizens, it's not just the powerful elites that want to keep a grip on their power. There are some citizens, but not nearly as many. There were some demonstrations, albeit very small, of people who were supporting these judicial reforms, who held up signs saying, Bibi, the people of Israel are with you. Bibi is the nickname of Benjamin Netanyahu. And the turnouts were really minor and tiny compared to the turnout that you're seeing right now. But those people say that they don't, and they're typically people who are very far right in Israel, and they like their really far-right government. And they typically say that the reason why they support it is because they don't like the fact that these unelected judges are able to decide on whether or not a law is reasonable when the law was voted on and put into effect by members of the Knesset who were elected. I think that is a fair argument. And that's kind of the argument that many people make about the Supreme Court, right? It's unelected. These people are appointed. They're then approved. And that's how they get to the bench. They're not an elected body. And yet they often will overturn laws that were made by the duly elected people. But that is how a democracy works. That's how we have our checks and balances. So I understand the argument, but there is now no protection for the people from the government when the government makes really unreasonable laws, and they often do, as we know. Now, the other decisions that they've decided to push are they've got a plan to give the government more sway on who gets to be a Supreme Court justice in Israel, so they'd actually get to pick the judges. So not only are they going to say, now you're not allowed to decide on what's reasonable, but now we're going to select who you are rather than going through a different process. They want to actually be the ones in charge. And they also want to allow Parliament to overrule courts' decisions as well. So the court can make decisions separate from the Knesset, and they want to give the Knesset the ability to override the court. So basically, the court could not override the Knesset. They've taken that power away today, but they want the Knesset to be able to override the court, no matter what the court says, and they want to be able to cherry pick the judges. So those two have been backburnered. People in Israel are really, really mad. You could probably see why. And we Americans probably should be as well. I believe, did we have the White House's statement on this? The White House also is this is why Biden did not invite Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House. He hasn't invited him to Washington. He invited instead the president, which is just a ceremonial position, just like a figure. It's not a real position of power of the president of Israel. But he hasn't invited Netanyahu because of these judicial reforms that he's trying to ram through, that he has effectively rammed through. So the White House made this statement today. A statement from the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, on Israel judicial reform. As a lifelong friend of Israel, President Biden has publicly and privately expressed his views that major changes in a democracy to be enduring must have as broad as a consensus as possible. It is unfortunate that the vote today took place with the slimmest possible majority. We understand talks are ongoing and likely to continue over the coming weeks and months to forge a broader compromise, even with the Knesset in recess. The United States will continue to support the efforts of President Herzog and other Israeli leaders as they seek to build a broader consensus through political dialogue. So what they're talking about with that slim vote, it passed with a very, very slim vote. I believe it was like 68 to nothing or 60 something to nothing. The reason why there were no votes against is because everybody who was opposed walked out in protest. They did not vote on this. They walked out and basically said that this was, antithetical to democracy, that this wasn't the right thing to do. People took to the streets. So this is incredibly unpopular, and yet they rammed it through. And who's to bet we're going to still send money? My bet is we are absolutely going to be sending money, and they're going to now be they're going to be doing more things they're not supposed to be doing, like building more illegal settlements in the West Bank. And so that's what's going on in Israel, those massive protests that you're seeing. And we'll hear more about this in the fall when they try to ram through more, would be my guess. Okay. It's the great COVID data cover-up that we need to be talking about, because a study used to push the first COVID booster is now shown to be heavily flawed. Let's go ahead and put this tweet up there. This was done by Rand Paul. He threw this out there saying, government science published a study purporting a 90% reduction in death from COVID if vaccine boosted. Only problem? Authors failed to reveal boosted group also had 90% reduction in deaths from all causes. In other words, the patient groups were not equal to begin with, and booster vaccine may or may not have had any effect. This insightful critique is exactly what the FBI and Department of Homeland Security have been attempting to censor, only this time it made it into the New England Journal of Medicine. And you can see there, Vinay Prasad, he does excellent work, and he's got a show, and he's on Twitter, and him and Tracy Hogue were the ones to uncover this research. So what they did, we're going to break this data down, essentially in a nutshell so that you can understand, is that the vaccine, the booster, this was the very first booster, and this data came from Israel because they were the first ones to get the vaccine. They vaccinated their entire population. It was really apparent after they did the 2 jabs that it was not stopping the spread. And then they were like, oh gosh, it didn't work. We're going to have to do a third. We're going to have to do a booster dose. So they then started booster dosing. This was around the time that we were rolling out still the first dose of the vaccine here. So we had not gotten to the booster at all. We were all relying on that Israeli data. So the Israelis come out and they say they're boosting, and they say, okay, hey, look at this. This data shows that there is a 90% reduction in COVID deaths if you get the vaccine. So get that booster. So everybody needs to get the booster. Everybody needs to get the booster. And if you get that booster, you have a 90% reduction in death. It's finally the third shot that's going to do it. Now, remember, this is third. I don't know what number we're on now. What are we on? 5, 6. So this is round 3. The problem is that Vinay Prasad and Tracy Hogue. Let me actually get this the study in front of me here. This is also Ram Durasetti and Tracy Hogue, and let me actually get the names of the people here so that we can give them good credit. So Tracy Hogue, Vinay Prasad, and Ram Durasetti, they uncovered this. Tracy Hogue is from the University of California, San Francisco. So is Vinay Prasad, and Ram Durasetti is from Stanford School of Medicine. And they looked at the data that was put out there by the Israelis, and they put right here in this thing, using observational methods. Arbel et al. That is the original study that was used to push the booster dose was published December 23rd of 2021. They calculated in that study and adjusted 90% lower mortality due to COVID-19 amongst participants who received a Pfizer booster, first Pfizer booster, than amongst those who did not receive a booster. So let me go over the numbers. They found 65 COVID-19 associated deaths among participants in the booster group. This is out of 100,000 persons, okay? And 137 deaths among the non-booster group. This was so 65 people who were boosted died from COVID, they claimed, and 137 died who were not boosted. So when you look at those numbers of 65 in one group and 137 in the other, that is a 94.6% difference. So you're twice as likely, basically, to die. Or they calculated on an adjusted, they said it was 90% lower mortality. Okay. Now, when these 3 researchers went and looked at this study, they found something really alarming. And what they found was that in another group they looked at, they found that those who were, this was people who died not from COVID. So they had the boosted group of people, the non-boosted group of people. In that group of people, they had people who died from COVID in both groups, with booster and without booster. But they also just had people die. And they were dying of other things, heart attacks, strokes, things that were not related to COVID at all, okay? Now, you could look back at that and we could do an even deeper scrutiny of that data and maybe say, well, did they die of strokes? Were the strokes related to the vaccine, right? You could do all of that, but let's just look at it. Let's just say that that's not the case. These people died of other natural causes completely, cancer or something that had nothing to do with the vaccine. So they looked and they said, okay, in that booster group, there were people that just died of not COVID. And then of the non-boosted group, there was also people who died not of COVID. When these 3 researchers looked at those numbers, they found something really alarming. They found that in the the booster group, they found, let's see if I can get the number. 441 people died in the, hold on, let me just get the actual, sometimes they make it easy to find the number, but then sometimes they don't. So it was 400 and, oh, right, here it is. So in the boosted group, 441 people died not of COVID. And in the non-boosted group, 963 people died not of COVID. Okay, so let's go back through those numbers. Of these groups, of the boosted group, 65 people died from COVID and 441 people died from something other than COVID. In the non-boosted group, it was 137 people died of COVID and 963 people died of something other than COVID. Do you see the problem there? So the problem is, in the group, there should have been roughly the same number on both sides, vaccinated or unvaccinated, of deaths of people who just died not of COVID. So if you have the same age group of people, let's say you take 2 groups of people, both groups are over the age of 65, none of them are in nursing homes. Maybe you control for things like comorbidities and you say, okay, everybody has at least 2 comorbidities or less. or they at least have one or two, and that's it, one or two in both groups. It's equal number of people that had one or two in both groups. It's totally equally distributed. And then you vaccinate one group and you don't vaccinate the other group. And you could see that, okay, roughly the same number of people died in both groups of other natural causes other than COVID. Otherwise, how do you explain for the fact that, it turns out that 94, they're saying that the difference in deaths, if you're still following me with this, I know it's a lot of numbers and math, but the difference in death between those who died with COVID, they died of COVID, they claimed, and they had the booster versus those who did not get the booster, they said it was a 94.6% difference. But here's the thing. The people that died that had nothing to do with COVID in the groups between the two when they did the math, it was 94.8% difference, almost identical. One's 94.6%, one's 94.8%. The people who died. So what they're showing here is that it didn't matter. That basically the group that died from COVID and died from natural causes was double the number of deaths in that group, whether they were boosted or not. So it was the people that were not boosted. This was the group that was not boosted. So essentially, what you can deduce from this, and now they haven't been able to fully deduce, they're not sure, but it looks like the people, when they got the study together, they basically found a group of, let's say, I'm not sure exactly who the cohorts were, but let's just say it was like 65-year-olds, like anybody from the age of 65 to 75, not in a nursing home, one comorbidity only. Let's give them the booster and see how well they do. This other group, they're in the nursing home. They're about to die. I mean, they're on their last leg. Don't give them the booster at all, and let's see how they fare. And then they could see that, those people died. They didn't have the booster. They died. And then this other group that's like healthy, they're 65, they're out cycling all the time. They didn't die. They did great. And then this group, we're just not going to tell you that they also died of a bunch of other things because they were in a nursing home and they were on their deathbed. And this other group did not die of those other things either. They were just a healthier group. So in other words, they picked a healthy group and they gave them the booster and said, look, the booster works. And they took an unhealthy group and they didn't give them the booster and they said, see, these people die. That's how it works. Unhealthy people die with no booster. Healthy people don't die with a booster. It's bullshit, right? Like we all can look at that and say, that's a flawed study. And that is what these researchers essentially showed, was that this is a completely flawed study. And this was the study that was used when they pushed the booster on everybody. This was the exact study they used. They said it shows 95% reduction in death. If you get the booster, you're not going to die. And that was not the case at all. As we know, people still got the booster. They got COVID. People still died. They then gave people 4 shots, 5 shots. I don't even know what number of shots that we're in right now. So that is that really incredibly flawed study. One more study I want to show you in this great COVID data cover-up. The U.S. military, it has come out through emails between Senator Ron Johnson and the Department of Justice. The Department of Defense. It turns out that the U.S. military confirms with their own data, with their own emails to Senator Ron Johnson, that there was an 150% increase in myocarditis in 2021. Let's go over this data. This is from Senator Ron Johnson wrote a letter. We're going to go over a bit of this letter just so that you could kind of understand this, and we're going to break down the data.
So
it wasn't just myocarditis that showed a really high increase. There's a bunch of other ailments that also have some high increase. So he writes this July 19th. Now, this is something he's been going back and forth with the Department of Defense, trying to get this data for quite some time. So this is just sort of an update to this back and forth. Essentially what happened was there were some whistleblowers that came forward saying, we've got all this data from the deaths of inside the military that show really, really high increases. When you look at the data from 2016 to 2020, I believe is what they were looking at. 2016 to 2020, and you compare it to 2021, the original whistleblower says there's just massive increase in various different ailments. Like, for example, Disease of the nervous system showed a 1,048% increase. It's not this data just yet. It's just the inside this big email. So then they show hypertension a 2,181% increase. This was the original data that was given to Ron Johnson and the Senate committee. Ovarian dysfunction, a 437% increase. Pulmonary embolism, 468% increase. Female infertility, 472% increase. Breast cancer, 487% increase. Guillain-Barré syndrome, 551% increase. So they were showing massive increases in this whistleblower data that originally came forward. Now the DOD comes forward and says, no, wait a minute, hold on. That data is not correct. What happened was that what 2021 from 2016 to 2020, we didn't collect as much data. So we only collected a fraction of the data. And then we started really collecting a lot more data. And so you have to control for the fact that, this was like 10%, that the data that we had from 2016 to 2020 was like 10% of what we had in 2021. So it shows these massive increases, but that's just because it was bad data gathering is what the DOD came back and claimed. So then Senator Johnson says, all right, well then give us the better data. So the DOD comes back and says, all right, we have now adjusted the data and we're seeing much lower rates. Like for example, hypertension, rather than a 2,181% increase, we're seeing a 1.9% increase. That's a drastic difference. So that's almost nothing, right? In 2021, you're basically seeing a minimal difference, 1.9% in hypertension compared to the years of 2016 to 2020. Because Ron Johnson's point is to get to is the military then mandated vaccines, and he wants to find out if the vaccine harmed military members. That's the point of this. Or was it COVID itself, or is everything's fine? There's nothing there, right? So the DOD showed, for example, pulmonary embolism. The original data showed a 468% increase. Their adjusted data showed a 25.4% increase. That is still a pretty big increase, 25.4% increase, but it's not 468%. Now fast forward, a couple more whistleblowers look again at the new data the DOD comes out with that I just shared with you, and they said, this still doesn't look right. They're lying. It's worse than they're saying. So those whistleblowers went through the data and they said, no, the DOD did not give you the full picture. They omitted about 3 months worth of data from 2021. Here's the actual bigger picture. And they showed hypertension, for example, the original data was 2,181% increase. That sounds crazy. The DOD came back with 1.9% in their new adjusted data. And the whistleblowers then that had better access to the data and combed through it said, no, it was actually a 12.6% increase. So that is a huge increase compared to what the DOD is claiming of 1.9. They're saying, no, the actual adjusted data is 12.6. For example, another big one would be like pulmonary embolism. The DOD eventually came back with their corrected data and said it was 25.4% increase. The new data, the really truly corrected data shows a 41.2% increase in pulmonary embolism. That is a significant increase. 41.2% is a significant increase from the years of 2016 to 2020. Suddenly in 2021, you've got a 41.2% increase in pulmonary embolism. That is really significant. So Ron Johnson writes to the DOD and he basically says, what's up with this? You guys need to give us more data, and here's some of my questions and I want some answers. So the DOD gives them some answers and says, all right, we're going to answer, and now let's put up these tables. The DOD came back with corrected data. This is from the Department of Defense themselves. And they said, okay, we're sorry about that. You're right. We were missing 3 months of data. Here's the new data. And this also included in this myocarditis. Now, the other data didn't have that in there, but you could see they found some of the big ones that stand out in the percentage of change between 2016 to 2020 and then 2021. Hypertensive diseases, 22.9% increase. Ovarian dysfunction, 34.9% increase. Migraines, 19.5% increase. Pulmonary embolism, 43.6% increase. Guillain-Barré syndrome, 14.9% increase. Malignant neoplasms of the digestive organs. So that's 18.3. I think those are ulcers. 18.3% increase. Malignant neoplasm of the esophagus, 12.5% increase. And look at this. Myocarditis. This is the government, the DOD's own data, 151.4% increase. They gave all of these military young men the vaccine, they forced them into it, and they saw a 151.4% increase in myocarditis in 2021. Now, the DOD, of course, is claiming, but it's not the vaccine. So they gave this data willingly. They said, these are the real increases we've corrected. This is what we're seeing. But the DOD says this was from COVID infection, not from vaccination. So they give them this other table and they say, look at this. This was the prior to COVID-19 infection versus prior to COVID-19 vaccination. And these are the overall numbers of how many people got it. So look at myocarditis at the bottom. They're saying that there was 69.8 people who got it who had prior COVID-19 infection, and 21.7 who had prior COVID-19 vaccination. And then they came out with myocarditis. So, and this is rate per 100,000. So this is not, that's not the total number. That's the rate per 100,000 military service people. Now, Ron Johnson has written back, and one of the reasons why he's written and why we're giving this update now is because he said to the DOD, he's like, yeah, okay, so you give us this prior COVID-19 infection and prior COVID-19 vaccination data, but you didn't give us the combined. You didn't tell us whether or not the people who had prior COVID-19 infection had also received a COVID-19 vaccination. So were these the people that got both? Because that's data we've been wanting to find out, right? We want to know how many people got myocarditis who just had COVID. There's many studies out there that show very, very little COVID myocarditis from those who never got vaccinated and only got COVID. We want to know what's that number compared to the number of people who just had COVID, who just had the vaccine and got myocarditis. And then what we want to see is inevitably, no matter if you got the vaccine and how many doses, I'd like to see how many doses, dose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those people ultimately, inevitably got COVID anyway. Now we know that. Everybody still got COVID. So what is the rate of myocarditis once you layer on COVID on top of vaccination? What is the rate of myocarditis when you layer COVID on top of double vaccination and booster, triple vax, or double vax, double boosted, double vaxxed, triple boosted? What then is the rate of myocarditis? We need to see that data, and we're not seeing that data. Instead, the DOD gives us as well. This rate, 69.8 out of every 100,000 had COVID infection, and 21.7 had vaccination. But they're not telling us you mandated the vaccine. So how many of those people who had prior COVID-19 infection also had the vaccine? You can't just say, did you have COVID? Oh, you did? Okay, then you're in this group, without asking them, did you also get the vaccine, and how many doses of the vaccine did you get? And then this other group says, never got COVID, only had the vaccine. And then they looked at that number and said, okay, there's only 21.7 of you. It would, of course, be lower because how many people got the vaccine and didn't get COVID, especially at the time that they collected this data. Now, if they were to collect the data again and really look at things, we may find very different numbers, increased numbers because more people got COVID after getting the vaccine. Then a lot of people got the vaccine again, even after getting COVID, after getting the first rounds of the vaccine, plus then getting COVID, they went and got vaccinated again. And so we want to know those numbers. So these are the numbers coming out of the DOD. We at least know that there was a 151% increase in myocarditis. They're trying to claim that was because of COVID itself. Senator Ron Johnson is saying, wait a minute, we want to know more information. Just stop right there. And we want to know more info. And so we're hopefully going to get that. There is no, in the United States, the best place to collect data from would be the military. We did not have a mass experiment like the Israeli people were experimented on when it came to this. They did a deal, vaccines for data. doses for data was their whole deal that they did. And so they collected really, really great data. And they probably do have data, but are we going to get it? I don't know. But we could at least maybe potentially get it from the U.S. military. So we will continue to follow that story. Senator Ron Johnson's been doing really great work following up on these things and pressing on this info and not forgetting about this, because this really does need to be followed up on and never forgotten. That is for sure. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here tonight. We will be back again tomorrow night with another great show, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. You could catch us here exclusively on Rumble. Also, if you want to email me, you certainly can do that. Kim@KimIverson.com is how you can reach me. I love hearing from you, your comments, your questions, your suggestions for topics and guests. I love hearing from you, so please reach out to me anytime, Kim@KimIverson.com. All right, guys, that is it. Have a great night. Bye-bye.